Okay. Thank you, dear devotees, for letting me read Bhagavatam along with you all. And today is what, day 16 of reading Srimad Bhagavatam, reading Yajna. So we will be reading 4th canto, 28th chapter, 26th verse. Starting from that till 5th canto, 2nd chapter, 6th verse. So let's say our prayers. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauruvani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Marga Swaminiti Namine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shila Sadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nishtaprayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Shrungvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtanaha Hridyantasto hya bhadrani vidhunoti suhritsatam. So, reading from 4:28-26. You know the name of the chapter. Puranjana becomes a woman in the next life.
Vaishnavi, are you going to be letting people in? You can make me a co-host if you want as
yes,
well.
I will. Yeah, I will. Go close who?
Make her co-host.
I will.
Okay. Text 26. That most unkind king Puranjan had killed many animals in various sacrifices. Now, taking advantage of this opportunity, all these animals began to pierce him with their horns. It was as though he were being cut to pieces by axes. Due to his contaminated association with women, a living entity like King Puranjan eternally suffers all the pangs of material existence and remains in the dark region of material life, bereft of all remembrance for many, many years. King Puranjan gave up his body while remembering his wife, and consequently, in his next life, he became a very beautiful and well-situated woman. He took his next birth as a daughter of King Vidarbha in the very house of the king. It was fixed that Vaidarbhi, daughter of King Vidarbha, was to be married to a very powerful man, Malayadhvaja, an inhabitant of the Pandu country. After conquering other princes, he married the daughter of King Vidarbha. King Malayadhvaja fathered one daughter who had very black eyes. He also had 7 sons, who later became rulers of that tract of land known as Dravida. Thus there were 7 kings in that land. My dear King Prachini Barhishat, the sons of Malayadhvaja gave birth to many thousands and thousands of sons, and all of these have been protecting the entire world up to the end of one Manu's lifespan and even afterward. The great sage named Agastya married the firstborn daughter of Malayadhvaja, the avowed devotee of Lord Krishna. From her one son was born whose name was Dridhachyuta, and from him another son was born whose name was Idmavaha. After this, the great saintly king Malayadhvaja divided his entire kingdom among his sons. Then, in order to worship Lord Krishna with full attention, he went to a solitary place known as Kulachala. Just as the moonshine follows the moon at night, immediately after, King Malayadhvaja departed for Kulachala. His devoted wife, whose eyes were very enchanting, followed him, giving up all homely happiness, despite family and children. In the province of Kulachala, there were rivers named Chandravasa, Tamraparni, and Vatodaka. King Malayadwaja used to go to those pious rivers regularly and take his bath there. Thus he purified himself externally and internally. He took his bath and ate bulbs, seeds, leaves, flowers, roots, fruits, and grasses, and drank water. In this way, he underwent severe austerities. Eventually, he became very skinny. Through austerity, King Malayadwaja in body and mind gradually became equal to the dualities of cold and heat, happiness and distress, wind and rain, hunger and thirst, the pleasant and the unpleasant. In this way, he conquered all relativities. By worshipping, executing austerities, and following the regulative principles, King Malayadwaja conquered his senses, his life, and his consciousness. Thus, he fixed everything on the central point of the Supreme Brahman, Krishna. In this way, he stayed immovable in one place for 100 years by the calculation of the demigods. After this time, he developed pure devotional attraction for Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and remained fixed in that position. King Malayadwaja attained perfect knowledge by being able to distinguish the supersoul from the individual soul. The individual soul is localized, whereas the supersoul is all pervasive. He became perfect in that knowledge, but that the material body is not the soul, but that the soul is the witness of the material body. In this way, King Malayadwaja attained perfect knowledge because in his pure state, he was directly instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By means of such enlightening transcendental knowledge, he could understand everything from all angles of vision. King Malayadwaja could thus observe that the supersoul was sitting by his side, and that he, as the individual soul, was sitting by the side of the supersoul. Since both were together, there was no need for separate interests. Thus he ceased from such activities. The daughter of King Vidarbha accepted her husband all in all as a supreme. She gave up all sensual enjoyment and in complete renunciation followed the principles of her husband, who was so advanced. Thus she remained engaged in his service. The daughter of King Vidarbha wore old garments, and she was lean and thin because of her vows of austerity. Since she did not arrange her hair, it became entangled and twisted in locks. Although she remained always near her husband, she was as silent and unagitated as the flame of an undisturbed fire. The daughter of King Vidarbha continued as usual to serve her husband, who was seated in a steady posture, until she could ascertain that he had passed away from the body. While she was serving her husband by massaging his legs, she could feel that his feet were no longer warm and could thus understand that he had already passed from the body. She felt great anxiety upon being left alone. Bereft of her husband's company, she felt exactly as a deer feels upon being separated from its mate. Being now alone and a widow in that forest, the daughter of Vidarbha began to lament, incessantly shedding tears, which soaked her breasts and crying very loudly. "O best of kings, please get up. Get up. Just see this world surrounded by water and infested with rogues and so-called kings. This world is very much afraid, and it is your duty to protect her." That most obedient wife thus fell down at the feet of her dead husband and began to cry pitifully in that solitary forest. Thus the tears rolled down from her eyes. She then prepared a blazing fire with firewood and placed the dead body of her husband upon it. When this was finished, she lamented severely and prepared herself to perish in the fire with her husband. "My dear king, one Brahmana, who was an old friend of King Puranjan, came to that place and began to pacify the queen with sweet words. The Brahmana inquired as follows: 'Who are you? Whose wife or daughter are you? Who is the man lying here? It appears you are lamenting for this body. Don't you recognize me? I am your eternal friend. You may remember that many times in the past you have consulted me.' The Brahmana continued, 'My dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend? Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position as enjoyer of this material world. My dear gentle friend, both you and I are exactly like two swans. We live together in the same heart, which is just like the Manasa lake. Although we have been living together for many thousands of years, we are still far away from our original home. My dear friend, you are now my very same friend. Since you left me, you have become more and more materialistic, and not seeing me, you have been traveling in different forms throughout this material world, which was created by some woman. In that city, material body, there are 5 gardens, 9 gates, 1 protector, 3 apartments, 6 families, 5 stores, 5 material elements, and 1 woman who is lord of the house. My dear friend, the 5 gardens are the 5 objects of sense enjoyment, and the protector is the life air, which passes through the 9 gates. The 3 apartments are the chief ingredients, fire, water, and earth. The 6 families are the aggregate total of the mind and 5 senses. The 5 stores are the 5 working sensory organs. They transact their business through the combined forces of the living elements, which are eternal. Behind all this activity is the soul. The soul is a person and an enjoyer in reality. However, because he is now hidden within the city of the body, he is devoid of knowledge. My dear friend, when you enter such a body along with the woman of material desires, you become overly absorbed in sense enjoyment. Because of this, you have forgotten your spiritual life. Due to your material conceptions, you are placed in various miserable conditions. Actually, you are not the daughter of Vidarbha, nor is this man Malayadhwaja, your well-wishing husband. Nor were you the actual husband of Puranjani. You were simply captivated in this body of 9 gates. Sometimes you think yourself a man, sometimes a chaste woman, and sometimes a neutral eunuch. This is all because of the body, which is created by the illusory energy. This illusory energy is my potency, and actually both of us, you and I, are pure spiritual identities. Now just try to understand this. I am trying to explain our factual position. My dear friend, I, the supersoul, and you, the individual soul, are not different in quality, for we are both spiritual. In fact, my dear friend, you are qualitatively not different from me in your constitutional position. Just try to consider this subject. Those who are actually advanced scholars who are in knowledge do not find any qualitative difference between you and me. As a person sees the reflection of his body in a mirror to be one with himself and not different, whereas others actually see 2 bodies. So in our material condition, in which the living being is affected and yet not affected, there is a difference between God and the living entity. In this way, both swans live together in the heart. When the one swan is instructed by the other, he is situated in his constitutional position. This means he regains his original Krishna consciousness, which was lost because of his material attraction. My dear King Prachini Barhi, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of all causes, celebrated to be known indirectly. Thus, I have described the story of Puranjan to you. Actually, it is an instruction for your self-realization. Continue. Chapter 29, talks between Narada and King Prachini Barhi. Text 1. King Prachina Barhi replied, My dear Lord, we could not appreciate completely the purport of your allegorical story of King Puranjan. Actually, those who are perfect in spiritual knowledge can understand, but for us who are overly attached to fruitive activities, to realize the purpose of your story is very difficult. The great sage Narada Muni continued, You must understand that Puranjan, the living entity, transmigrates according to his own work into different types of bodies, which may be 1-legged, 2-legged, 3-legged, 4-legged, many-legged, or simply legless. Transmigrating into these various types of bodies, the living entity as a so-called enjoyer is known as Puranjan. The person I have described as unknown is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Master and eternal friend of the living entity. Since the living entities cannot realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead by material names, activities, or qualities, he remains everlastingly known to the conditioned. He remains everlastingly unknown to the conditioned soul. When the living entity wants to enjoy the modes of material nature in their totality, he prefers out of many bodily forms to accept that body which has 9 gates, 2 hands, and 2 legs. Thus he prefers to become a human being or a demigod. The great sage Narada continued. The word pramada mentioned in this regard refers to material intelligence or ignorance. It is to be understood as such. When one takes shelter of this kind of intelligence, he identifies himself with the material body. Influenced by the material consciousness of I and mine, he begins to enjoy and suffer through his senses. Thus, the living entity is entrapped. The five working senses and the five senses that acquire knowledge are all male friends of Puranjani. The living entity is assisted by these senses in acquiring knowledge and engaging in activity. The engagements of the senses are known as girlfriends, and the serpent, which was described as having five heads, is a life air acting within the five circulatory processes. The 11th attendant, who is the commander of the others, is known as the mind. He is the leader of the senses, both in the acquisition of knowledge and in the performance of work. The Panchala kingdom is that atmosphere in which the five sense objects are enjoyed. Within that Panchala kingdom is a city of the body, which has 9 gates. The eyes, nostrils, and ears are pairs of gates situated in one place. The mouth, genitals, and rectum are also different gates. Being placed into a body having these 9 gates, the living entity acts externally in the material world and enjoys sense objects like form and taste. 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, and a mouth, altogether 5, are situated in the front. The right ear is accepted as the southern gate, and the left ear is the northern gate. The 2 holes, or gates, situated in the west are known as the rectum and genital organ. The 2 gates named Kadyota and Avirmukhi, which have been spoken of, are the 2 eyes side in one place. The town named Vibhrajita should be understood as form. In this way, the 2 eyes are always engaged in seeing different kinds of forms. The 2 doors named Nalini and Nalini should be known as the 2 nostrils, and the city named Saurabha represents aroma. The companion spoken of as Avadhut is the sense of smell. The door called Mukhya is the mouth, and Viparna is the faculty of speech. Rasagnya is the sense of taste. The city called Aparna represents engagement of the tongue in speech, and Bahudana is the variety of foodstuffs. The right ear is called the gate of Pitrahu, and the left ear is called the gate of Devahu. Narada Muni continued, the city spoken of as Dakshina Panchala represents the scriptures meant for directing pravritti, the process of sense enjoyment in fruitive activities. The other city, named Uttara Panchala, represents the scriptures meant for decreasing fruitive activities and increasing knowledge. The living entity receives different kinds of knowledge by means of 2 ears, and some living entities are promoted to Pitraloka and some to Devaloka. All this is made possible by the 2 ears. The city called Gramaka, which is approached through the lower gate of Asuri, the genital organ, is meant for sex, which is very pleasing to common men who are simply fools and rascals. The faculty of procreation is called Durmada, and the rectum is called Niriti. When it is said that Puranjana goes to Vaishasa, it is meant that he goes to hell. He is accompanied by Lubdhaka, which is the working sense in the rectum. Formerly, I have also spoken of 2 blind associates. These associates should be understood to be the hands and legs. Being helped by the hands and legs, the living entity performs all kinds of work and moves hither and thither. The word Antahapura refers to the heart. The word Vishu China means going everywhere, indicates the mind. Within the mind of the living entity enjoys the effects of the modes of material nature. These effects sometimes cause illusion, sometimes satisfaction, and sometimes jubilation. Formerly, it was explained that the queen is one's intelligence. While one is awake or asleep, that intelligence creates different situations. Being influenced by contaminated intelligence, the living entity envisions something and simply imitates the actions and reactions of his intelligence. Narada Muni continued, what I referred to as a chariot was in actuality the body. The senses are the horses that pull that chariot. As time passes, year after year, these horses run without obstruction, but in fact, they make no progress. Pious and impious activities are the two wheels of the chariot. The three modes of material nature are the chariot's flags. The five types of life air constitute the living entity's bondage, and the mind is considered to be the rope. The intelligence is the chariot driver. The heart is a sitting place in the chariot, and the dualities of life, such as pleasure and pain, are the knotting place. The seven elements are the coverings of the chariot, and the working senses are the five external processes. The 11 senses are the soldiers. Being engrossed in sense enjoyment, the living entity seated on the chariot hankers after fulfillment of his false desires and runs after sense enjoyment life after life. What was previously explained as Chandavega, powerful time, is by days and nights, named Gandharvas and Gandharvis. The body's lifespan is gradually reduced by the passage of days and nights, which number 360. What was described as Kala Kanya should be understood as old age. No one wants to accept old age, but Yavaneshvara, Yavanaraj, who is death, accepts Jara, old age, as his sister. The followers of Yavaneshvara, Yamaraj, are called the soldiers of death, and they are known as the various types of disturbances that pertain to the body and mind. Prajvara represents the two types of fever, extreme heat and extreme cold, typhoid and pneumonia. The living entity lying down within the body is disturbed by many tribulations pertaining to providence, to other living entities, and to his own body and mind. Despite all kinds of tribulations, the living entity, subjected to the necessities of the body, mind, and senses, and suffering from various types of disease, is carried away by many plans due to his lust to enjoy the world. Although transcendental to this material existence, the living entity, out of ignorance, accepts all these material miseries under the pretext of false egoism, I and mine. In this way, he lives for 100 years within this body. The living entity by nature has minute independence to choose his own good or bad fortune. But when he forgets his supreme master, the personality of Godhead, he gives himself up unto the modes of material nature. Being influenced by the modes of material nature, he identifies himself with the body and, for the interest of the body, becomes attached to various activities. Sometimes he is under the influence of the mode of ignorance, sometimes the mode of passion, and sometimes the mode of goodness. The living entity thus gets different types of bodies under the modes of material nature. Those who are situated in the mode of goodness act piously according to Vedic injunctions. Thus they are elevated to the higher planetary systems where the demigods live. Those who are influenced by the mode of passion engage in various types of productive activities in the planetary systems where human beings live. Similarly, those influenced by the mode of darkness are subjected to various types of misery and live in the animal kingdom. Covered by the mode of ignorance in material nature, the living entity is sometimes a male, sometimes a female, sometimes a eunuch, sometimes a human being, sometimes a demigod, sometimes a bird, an animal, and so on. In this way, he is wandering within the material world. His acceptance of different types of bodies is brought about by his activities under the influence of the modes of nature. The living entity is exactly like a dog who, overcome with hunger, goes from door to door for some food. According to his destiny, he sometimes receives punishment and is driven out, and at other times receives a little food to eat. Similarly, the living entity, being influenced by so many desires, wanders in different species of life according to destiny. Sometimes he is high and sometimes he is low. Sometimes he goes to the heavenly planets, sometimes to hell, sometimes to the middle planets, and so on. The living entities are trying to counteract different miserable conditions pertaining to providence. Other living entities, or the body and mind, still they must remain conditioned by the laws of nature, despite all attempts to counter these laws. A man may carry a burden on his head, and when he feels it to be too heavy, he sometimes gives relief to his head by putting the burden on his shoulder. In this way, he tries to relieve himself of the burden. However, whatever process he devises to counteract the burden does nothing more than put the same burden from one place to another. Narada continued, O you who are free from all sinful activity, No one can counteract the effects of fruitive activity simply by manufacturing a different activity devoid of Krishna consciousness. All such activity is due to our ignorance. When we have a troublesome dream, we cannot relive it with a troublesome hallucination. One can counteract a dream only by awaking. Similarly, our material existence is due to our ignorance and delusion. Unless we awaken to Krishna consciousness, we cannot be relieved of such dreams. For the ultimate solution to all problems, we must awaken to Krishna consciousness. Sometimes we suffer because we see a tiger in a dream or a snake in a vision, but actually there is neither a tiger nor a snake. Thus we create some situation in a subtle form and suffer the consequences. These sufferings cannot be mitigated unless we are awakened from our dream. The real interest of a living entity is to get out of the nescience that causes him to endure repeated birth and death. The only remedy is to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead through his representative. Unless one renders devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, one cannot possibly become completely detached from this material world, nor can he possibly manifest real knowledge. O best of kings, one who is faithful, who is always hearing the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is always engaged in the culture of Krishna consciousness and in hearing of the Lord's activities, very soon becomes eligible to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. My dear king, in the place where pure devotees live, following the rules and regulations, and thus purely conscious and engaged with great eagerness in hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in that place, if one gets a chance to hear their constant flow of nectar, which is exactly like the waves of a river, one will forget the necessities of life, namely hunger and thirst, and become immune to all kinds of fear, lamentation, and illusion. Because the conditioned soul is always disturbed by the bodily necessities such as hunger and thirst, he has very little time to cultivate attachment to hearing the nectarian words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The most powerful Lord Brahma, the father of all progenitors, Lord Shiva, Manu, Daksha, and the other rulers of humankind, the four saintly first-class brahmacharis headed by Sanaka and Sanatan, the great sages Marichi, Atri, Angira, Pulastya, Pulahu, Kratu, Bhrigu, and Vasishta, and my humble self, Narada, are all stalwart brahmanas who can speak authoritatively on Vedic literature. We are very powerful because of austerities, meditation, and education. Nonetheless, even after inquiring about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whom we always see, we do not know perfectly about him. Despite the cultivation of Vedic knowledge, which is unlimited, and the worship of different demigods by the symptoms of Vedic mantras, demigod worship does not help one to understand the Supreme Powerful Personality of Godhead. When a person is fully engaged in devotional service, he is favored by the Lord, who bestows his causeless mercy. At such a time, the awakened devotee gives up all material activities and ritualistic performances mentioned in the Vedas. My dear King Badhishman, you should never, out of ignorance, take to the Vedic rituals or to fruitive activities, which may be pleasing to hear about or which may appear to be the goal of self-interest. You should never take these to be the ultimate goal of life. Those who are less intelligent accept the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies as all in all. They do not know that the purpose of the Vedas is to understand one's own home, where the Supreme Personality of Godhead lives. Not being interested in their real home, they are illusioned and search after other homes. My dear king, the entire world is covered with the sharp points of kusha grass, and on the strength of this, you have become proud because you have killed various types of animals in sacrifices. Because of your foolishness, you do not know that devotional service is the only way one can please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You cannot understand this fact. Your only activities should be those that can please the Personality of Godhead. Our education should be such that we can become elevated to Krishna consciousness. Sri Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the super soul and guide of all living entities who have accepted material bodies within this world. He is the supreme controller of all material activities and material nature. He is also our best friend, and everyone should take shelter at his lotus feet. In doing so, one's life will be auspicious. One who is engaged in devotional service has not the least fear in material existence. This is because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supersoul and friend of everyone. One who knows this secret is actually educated, and one thus educated can become the spiritual master of the world. One who is an actually bona fide spiritual master, representative of Krishna, is not different from Krishna. The great Saint Narada continued, O great personality, I have replied properly about all that you have asked me. Now hear another narration that is accepted by saintly persons and is very confidential. My dear king, please search out that deer who is engaged in eating grass in a very nice flower garden along with his wife. That deer is very much attached to his business, and he is enjoying the sweet singing of the bumblebees in his garden. Just try to understand his position. He is unaware that before him is a tiger who is accustomed to living at the cost of another's flesh. Behind the deer is a hunter who is threatening to pierce him with sharp arrows. Thus the deer's death is imminent. My dear king, woman who is my dear king, woman who is very attractive in the beginning, but in the end very disturbing, is exactly like the flower, which is attractive in the beginning and detestable at the end. With woman, the living entity is entangled with lusty desires, and he enjoys sex just as one enjoys the aroma of a flower. He thus enjoys a life of sense gratification, from his tongue to his genitals, and in this way the living entity considers himself very happy in family life. United with his wife, he always remains absorbed in such thoughts. He feels great pleasure in hearing the talks of his wife and children, which are like the sweet humming of bumblebees that collect honey from flower to flower. He forgets that before him is time, which is taking away his lifespan with the passing of day and night. He does not see the gradual diminishing of his life, nor does he care about the superintendent of death who is trying to kill him from behind. Just try to understand this. You are in a precarious position and are threatened from all sides. My dear king, just try to understand the allegorical position of the deer. Be fully conscious of yourself and give up the pleasure of hearing about promotion to heavenly planets by fruitive activity. Give up household life, which is full of sex, as well as stories about such things, and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the mercy of the liberated souls. In this way, please give up your attraction for material existence. The king replied, My dear Brahmana, whatever you have said, I have heard with great attention, and considering all of it, have come to the conclusion that the acharyas, teachers who engaged me in fruitive activity, did not know this confidential knowledge. If they were aware of it, why did they not explain it to me? My dear Brahmana, there are contradictions between your instructions and those of my spiritual teachers, who engaged me in fruitive activities. I now can understand the distinction between devotional service, knowledge, and renunciation. I had some doubts about them, but you have now very kindly dissipated all these doubts. I can now understand how even the great sages are bewildered by the real purpose of life. Of course, there is no question of sense gratification. The results of whatever a living entity does in this life are enjoyed in the next life. The expert knowers of the Vedic conclusions say that one enjoys or suffers the results of his past activities, but practically it is seen that the body that performed the work in the last birth is already lost. So how is it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of that work in a different body? The great sage Narada continued, the living entity acts in a gross body in this life. This body is forced to act by the subtle body, composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change. The living entity, while dreaming, gives up the actual body. Through the activities of his mind and intelligence, he acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. After giving up this gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or on another planet. He thus enjoys the results of the actions of his past life. The living entity labors under the bodily conception of I am this, I am that, my duty is this, and therefore I shall do it. These are all mental impressions, and all these activities are temporary. Nonetheless, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets a chance to execute all his mental concoctions. Thus, he gets another body. One can understand the mental or conscious position of a living entity by the activities of two kinds of senses, the knowledge acquiring senses and the executive senses. Similarly, by the mental condition or consciousness of a person, one can understand his position in the previous life. Sometimes we suddenly experience something that was never experienced in the present body by sight or hearing. Sometimes we see such things suddenly in dreams. Therefore, my king, the living entity who has a subtle mental covering develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in the previous body. O king, all good fortune unto you. The mind is the cause of the living entities attaining a certain type of body in accordance with his association with material nature. According to one's mental composition, one can understand what the living entity was in his past life, as well as what kind of body he will have in the future. Thus, the mind indicates the past and present. Thus, the mind indicates the past and future bodies. Sometimes, in a dream, we see something never experienced or heard of in this life, but all these incidents have been experienced at different times, in different places, and in different conditions. The mind of the living entity continues to exist in various gross bodies, and according to one's desires for sense gratification, the mind records different thoughts. In the mind, these appear together in different combinations. Therefore, these messages sometimes appear as things never seen or never heard before. Krishna consciousness means constantly associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in such a mental state that the devotee can observe the cosmic manifestation exactly as the Supreme Personality of Godhead does. Such observation is not always possible, but it becomes manifest exactly like the dark planet known as Rahu, which is observed in the presence of the full moon. As long as there exists the subtle material body composed of intelligence, mind, senses, sense objects, and the reactions of the material qualities, the consciousness of false identification and its relative objective, the gross body, exists as well. When the living entity is in deep sleep, when he faints, when there is some great shock on account of severe loss at the time of death, or when the body temperature is very high, the movement of the life air is arrested. At that time, the living entity loses knowledge of identifying the body with the self. When one is a youth, all the 10 senses and the mind are completely visible. However, in the mother's womb or in the boyhood state, the sense organs and the mind remain covered, just as the full moon is covered by the darkness of the dark moon night. When the living entity dreams, the sense objects are not actually present. However, because one is associated with the sense objects, they become manifest. Similarly, the living entity with undeveloped senses does not cease to exist materially, even though he may not be exactly in contact with the sense objects. The 5 sense objects, the 5 sense organs, the 5 knowledge acquiring senses, and the mind are the 16 material expansions. These combine with the living entity and are influenced by the 3 modes of material nature. Thus, the existence of the conditioned soul is understood. By virtue of the processes of the subtle body, the living entity develops and gives up gross bodies. This is known as the transmigration of the soul. Thus, the soul becomes subjected to different types of so-called enjoyment, lamentation, fear, happiness, and unhappiness. The caterpillar transports itself from one leaf to another by capturing one leaf before giving up the other. Similarly, according to his previous work, the living entity must capture another body before giving up the one he has. This is because the mind is a reservoir of all kinds of desires. As long as we desire to enjoy sense gratification, we create material activities. When the living entity acts in the material field, he enjoys the senses, and while enjoying the senses, he creates another series of material activities. In this way, the living entity becomes entrapped as a conditioned soul. You should always know that this cosmic manifestation is created, maintained, and annihilated by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, everything within this cosmic manifestation is under the control of the Lord. To be enlightened by this perfect knowledge, one should always engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord. The great sage Maitreya continued. The supreme devotee, the great Saint Narada, thus explained to King Prachina Barhi the constitutional position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity. After giving an invitation to the king, Narada Muni left to return to Siddhaloka. In the presence of his ministers, the saintly king Prachina Barhi left orders for his son to protect the citizens. He then left home and went off to undergo austerities in a holy place known as Kapilashrama. Having undergone austerities and penances as Kapilashram, King Prachina Barhi attained full liberation from all material designations. He constantly engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord and attained a spiritual position qualitatively equal to that of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. My dear Vidura, one who hears this narration concerning the understanding of the living entity's spiritual existence as described by this great sage Narada, or who relates it to others, will be liberated from the bodily conception of life. This narration spoken by the great sage Narada is full of transcendental fame of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, this narration, when described, certainly sanctifies this material world. It purifies the heart of the living entity and helps him attain his spiritual identity. One who relates this transcendental narration will be liberated from all material bondage and will no longer have to wander within this material world. The allegory of King Puranjan described herein according to authority was heard by me from my spiritual master, and it is full of spiritual knowledge. If one can understand the purpose of this allegory, he will certainly be relieved from the bodily conception and will clearly understand life after death. Although one may not understand what transmigration of the soul actually is, one can fully understand it by studying this narration. A desire to maintain body, wife, and children is also observed in animal society. The animals have full intelligence to manage such affairs. If a human being is simply advanced in this respect, what is the difference between him and an animal? One should be very careful to understand that this human life is attained after many, many births in the evolutionary process. A learned man who gives up the bodily conception of life, both gross and subtle, will, by the enlightenment of spiritual knowledge, become a prominent individual spirit soul, as the Supreme Lord is also. If a living entity is developed in Krishna consciousness and is merciful to others, and if his spiritual knowledge of self-realization is perfect, he will immediately attain liberation from the bondage of material existence. Everything happening within time, which consists of past, present, and future, is merely a dream. That is the secret understanding in all Vedic literature.
Okay, thank you. Shri Vrindavan, you want to go next? Or Mother Malati? You will be reading chapter 30. Whoever reads will be next one. Doing chapter 30. Shikshashtaka, are you ready to go? Dandaki.
Sorry, chapter 30, the activities of the Prachetas. I'm sorry. Activities of the Prachetas. Vidura in text 1. Vidura inquired from Maitreya. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
O Brahmana, you formerly spoke about the son of Prachina Bari and informed me that they satisfied the Supreme Personality of Godhead by chanting a song composed by Lord Shiva. What did they achieve in this way? Text 2. My dear Bharaspatya, what did the sons of King Bharisat, known as the Prachetas, obtain after meeting Lord Shiva, who is very dear to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the bestower of liberation? Certainly, they were transferred to the spiritual world. But apart from that, what did they obtain within this material world, either in this life or in other lives? Text 3. The great sage Maitreya said, the sons of King Prachinabhari, known as the Prachetas, underwent severe austerities within the sea water to carry out the order of their father. By chanting and repeating the mantras given by Lord Shiva, they were able to satisfy Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 4. At the end of 10,000 years of severe austerities performed by the Prachetas, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to reward their austerities, appeared before them in his very pleasing form. This appealed to the Prachetas and satisfied the labor of their austerities. 5. The personality of Godhead, appearing on the shoulder of Garuda, seemed like a cloud resting on the summit of the mountain known as Meru. The transcendental body of the personality of Godhead was covered by attractive yellow garments, and his neck was covered with the jewel known as Kaustuva Mani. The bodily effulgence of the Lord dissipated all the darkness of the universe. 6. The Lord's face was very beautiful, and his head was decorated with a shining helmet and golden ornaments. The helmet was dazzling and was very beautifully situated on his head. The Lord had 8 arms which each held a particular weapon. The Lord was surrounded by demigods, great sages, and other associates. These were all engaged in his service. Garuda, the carrier of the Lord, glorified the Lord with Vedic hymns by flapping his wings. Garuda appeared to be an inhabitant of the planet known as Kinnaraloka. 7. Around the neck of the personality of Godhead hung a flower garland that reached to his knees. His 8 stout and elongated arms were decorated with that garland, which challenged the beauty of the goddess of fortune. With a merciful glance and a voice like thunder, the Lord addressed the kings of King Prachinabharishat, who were very much surrendered unto him. 8. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, my dear sons of the king, I am very much pleased by the friendly relationships among you. All of you are engaged in one occupation, devotional service. I am so pleased with your mutual friendship that I wish you all good fortune. Now you may ask a benediction of me. 9. The Lord continued, those who remember you every evening of every day will become friendly with their brothers and with all other living entities. 10. Those who will offer me the prayers composed by Lord Shiva both in the morning and in the evening will be given benedictions by me. In this way, they can both fulfill their desires and attain good intelligence. 11. Because you have with pleasure accepted within your hearts the orders of your father and have executed those orders very faithfully, your attractive qualities will be celebrated all over the world. 12. You'll have a nice son who will be in no way inferior to Lord Brahma. Consequently, he will be very famous all over the universe, and the sons and grandsons generated by him will fill the 3 worlds. 13. O sons of King Prachinabharishat, the heavenly society girl named Pramlocha kept the lotus-eyed daughter of Kandu in the care of the forest trees. Then she went back to the heavenly planet. This daughter was born by the coupling of the Apsara named Pramlocha with the sage Kandu. 14. Thereafter, the child who was left to the care of the trees began to cry in hunger. At that time, the king of the forest, namely the king of the moon planet, out of compassion, placed his finger, which poured forth nectar, within the child's mouth. Thus the child was raised by the mercy of the king of the moon. 15. Since all of you are very much obedient to my orders, I ask you to immediately marry that girl who is so well qualified with beauty and good qualities. According to the order of your father, create progeny through her. 16. You brothers are all of the same nature, being my devotees and obedient sons of your father. Similarly, that girl is also of the same type and is dedicated to all of you. Thus, both the girl and you, the sons of Prachinabharishat, are on the same platform, being united on a common principle. 17. The Lord then blessed all the Prachetas, saying, my dear princess, by my mercy, you can enjoy all the facilities of this world as well as the heavenly world. Indeed, you can enjoy all of them without hindrance and with full strength for 1,000,000 celestial years. 18. Thereafter, you will develop unadulterated devotional service unto me and be freed from all material contamination. At that time, being completely unattached to material enjoyment in the so-called heavenly planets as well as hellish planets, you will return home back to Godhead. 19. Those who are engaged in auspicious activities and devotional service certainly understand that the ultimate enjoyer or beneficiary of all activities is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, when one acts, he offers the results to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and passes life always engaged in the topics of the Lord. Even though such a person may be participating in family life, he is not affected by the results of his action. 20. Always engaging in the activities of devotional service, devotees feel ever increasingly fresh and new in all their activities. The all knower super soul within the heart of the devotee makes everything increasingly fresh. This is known as a Brahman position by the advocates of the absolute truth. In such a liberated stage, Brahmabhuta, one is never bewildered, nor does one lament or become unnecessarily jubilant. This is due to the Brahmabhuta situation. 21. The great sage Maitreya said, after the personality of God had spoke thus, the Prachetas began to offer him prayers. The Lord is the bestower of all success in life and is the supreme benefactor. He is also the supreme friend who takes away all miserable conditions experienced by a devotee. In a faltering voice due to ecstasy, the Prachetas began to offer prayers. They were purified by the presence of the Lord who was there before them face to face. 22. The Prachetas spoke as follows. Dear Lord, you relieve all kinds of material distress. Your magnanimous transcendental qualities and holy name are all auspicious. This conclusion is already settled. You can go faster than the speed of mind and words. You cannot be perceived by material senses. We therefore offer you respectful obeisances again and again. 23. Dear Lord, we beg to offer our obeisances unto you. When the mind is fixed upon you, the world of duality, although a place for material enjoyment, appears meaningless. Your transcendental form is full of transcendental bliss. We therefore offer our respects to you. Your appearances as Lord Brahma, Lord Vishnu, and Lord Shiva are meant for the purpose of creating, maintaining, and annihilating this cosmic manifestation. Dear Lord, 24, we offer our respectful obeisances unto you because your existence is completely independent of all material influences. Your Lordship always takes away the devotees' miserable conditions, for your brain plans how to do so. You live everywhere as Paramatma, therefore you're known as Vasudev. You also accept Vasudeva as your father and you're celebrated by the name Krishna. You're so kind that you always increase the influence of all kinds of devotees. 25. Dear Lord, we offer respectful obeisances unto you because from your abdomen sprouts the lotus flower, the origin of all living entities. You're always decorated with the lotus garland, and your feet resemble the lotus flower with all its fragrance. Your eyes are also like the petals of a lotus flower. Therefore, we always offer respectful obeisances unto you. 26. Dear Lord, the garment you have put on is yellowish in color like the saffron of a lotus flower, but it is not made of anything material. Since you live in everyone's heart, you are the direct witness of all the activities of all living entities. We offer respectful obeisance unto you again and again. 27. Dear Lord, we conditioned souls are always covered by ignorance in the bodily conception of life. We therefore always prefer the miserable conditions of material existence. To deliver us from these miserable conditions, you have invented yourself in this transcendental form. This is evidence of your unlimited, causeless mercy upon those of us who are suffering in this way. And what to speak of the devotees to whom you are always so favorably disposed. 28. Dear Lord, you are the killer of all inauspicious things. You are compassionate upon your pure devotees, the expansion of your Archa Vigraha. You should certainly think of us as your eternal servants. 29. When the Lord, out of his natural compassion, thinks of his devotees, by that process only are all desires of the neophyte devotee fulfilled. The Lord is situated in every living entity's heart. Although the living entity may be very insignificant, the Lord knows everything about the living entity, including all his desires. Although we are very insignificant, why should the Lord not know our desires? 30. O Lord of the universe, you are the actual teacher of the science of devotional service. We are satisfied that your Lordship is the ultimate goal of our life, and we pray that you will be satisfied with us. That's our benediction. We do not desire anything other than your full satisfaction. 31. Dear Lord, we shall therefore pray for your benediction because you are the supreme, beyond all transcendence, and because there is no end to your opulences. Consequently, you are celebrated by the name Ananta. 32. Dear Lord, when the bee approaches a celestial tree called the Parijata, it certainly does not leave the tree because there is no need for such action. Similarly, when we have approached your lotus feet and taken shelter of them, what further benediction may we ask of you? Dear Lord, 33. As long as we have to remain within this material world due to our material contamination and wander from one type of body to another and from one planet to another, we pray that we may associate with those who are engaged in discussing your pastimes. We pray for this benediction life after life in different bodily forms and on different planets. 34. Even a moment's association with a pure devotee cannot be compared to being transferred to heavenly planets, or even merging into Brahman effulgence in complete liberation. For living entities who are destined to give up the body and die, association with pure devotees is the highest benediction. Mother Vaishnavi, can you see how many verses? Because I think I can read 40. 35. Whenever pure topics of the transcendental world are discussed, the members of the audience forget all kinds of material hankerings, at least for the time being. Not only that, but they are no longer envious of one another, nor do they suffer from anxiety or fear. 36. The Supreme Lord Narayan is present among devotees who are engaged in hearing and chanting the holy name of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Narayan. Oh, Lord, period. Lord Narayan is the ultimate goal of sannyasis, those in the renounced order of life, and Narayan is worshipped through this Sankirtan movement by those who are liberated from material contamination. Indeed, they recite the holy name again and again. 37. Dear Lord, your personal associates, devotees wander all over the world to purify even the holy places of pilgrimage. Is not such activity pleasing to those who are actually afraid of material existence? 38. Dear Lord, by virtue of a moment's association with Lord Shiva, who is very dear to you and who is your most intimate friend, we were fortunate to attain you. You are the most expert physician capable of treating the incurable disease of material existence. On account of our great fortune, we have been able to take shelter at your lotus feet. Text 39 and 40. Dear Lords, we have studied the Vedas, accepted a spiritual master, and offered respect to Brahmanas, advanced devotees, and aged personalities who are spiritually very advanced. We have offered our respects to them, and we have not been envious of any brother, friends, or anyone else. We've also undergone severe austerities within the water and have not taken food for a long time. All these spiritual assets of ours are simply offered for your satisfaction. We pray for this benediction only and nothing more. Can somebody else read now?
Yeah, I can do. There is 10 more verses here.
We are on text 41 of chapter 30.
After this, Mother...
You're muted.
Or,
How many verses are there in this chapter?
Not too many.
Maybe. I can't hear you. You're muted. You're still muted.
No, I'm not muted.
Can't hear you. Okay, I'll continue reading. Dear Lord, even great yogis and mystics who are very much advanced by virtue of austerities and knowledge and who have completely situated themselves in pure existence, as well as great personalities like Manu, Lord Brahma, and Lord Shiva, cannot fully understand your glories and potencies. Nonetheless, they have offered their prayers according to their own capacities. In this way, in the same way, we, although much lower than these personalities, also offer our prayers according to our own capability. Is anybody else ready? Mother Vaishnavi?
Okay, so you read 41? You read up to 41, correct?
Oh, it's almost finished. Sorry.
All right. Yeah, no, I can read the next.
Dear Lord, you have no enemies or friends, therefore you are equal to everyone. You cannot be contaminated by sinful activities, and your transcendental form is always beyond the material creation. You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead because you remain everywhere within all existence. You're consequently known as Vasudev. We offer you our respectful obeisances. 43. The great sage Maitreya continued, My dear Vidura, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the protector of surrendered souls, being thus addressed by the Prachetas and worshipped by them, replied, May whatever you have prayed for be fulfilled. After saying this, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose prowess is never defeated, left. The Prachetas were unwilling to be separated from him because they had not seen him to their full satisfaction. 44. After all the Prachetas emerged from the waters of the sea, they then saw that all the trees on land had grown very tall, as if to obstruct the path to the heavenly planets. These trees had covered the entire surface of the world. At this time, the Prachetas became very angry. 45. My dear king, at the time of devastation, Lord Shiva emits fire and air from his mouth out of anger. To make the surface of the earth completely treeless, the Prachetas also emitted fire and air from their mouths. 46. After seeing that all the trees on the surface of the earth were being turned to ashes, Lord Brahma immediately came to the sons of King Bharishman and pacified them with words of logic. 47. The remaining trees, being very much afraid of the Prachetas, immediately delivered their daughter at the advice of Lord Brahma. 48. Following the order of Lord Brahma, all the Prachetas accepted the girl as their wife. From the womb of this girl, the son of Lord Brahma named Daksha took birth. Daksha had to take birth from the womb of Marisha due to his disobeying and disrespecting Lord Mahadev, Shiva. Consequently, had to give up his body twice. 49. His previous body had been destroyed, but he, the same Daksha, inspired by the supreme will, created all the desired living entities in the Chakshusha Manvantara. 50 and 51. After being born, Daksha, by the super excellence of his bodily luster, covered all others' bodily opulence. Because he was very expert in performing fruitive activity, he was called by the name Daksha, meaning very expert. Lord Brahma therefore engaged Daksha in the work of generating living entities and maintaining them. In due course of time, Daksha also engaged other Prajapatis, progenitors, in the process of generation and maintenance. Thus ends chapter 30, translation of Canto 4, Hari Bol.
Mother Malati, are you going to read the next?
You're muted, Mother.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The great sage Maitreya continued. After that, the Prachitas lived at home for thousands of years and developed perfect knowledge and spiritual consciousness. At last, they remembered the blessings of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and left home, putting their wife in charge of a perfect son. The Prachitas went to the seashore in the west where the great liberated sage Chijali was residing. After perfecting the spiritual knowledge by which one becomes equal towards all living entities, the Prachetas became perfect in Krishna consciousness. After practicing the Yogashanas for mystic yoga, the Prachetas managed to control their life air, mind, words, and external vision. Thus, by the pranayama process, they were completely relieved of material attachment. By remaining perpendicular, they could concentrate their minds on the uppermost Brahman. While they were practicing this pranayama, the great sage Narada, who is worshipped both by demons and by demigods, came to see them. As soon as the Prachetas saw that the great sage Narada had appeared, they immediately got up, even from their asanas. As required, they immediately offered obeisances and worshipped him. And when they saw that Narada Muni was properly seated, they began to ask him questions. Text 5. All the Prachetas began to address the great sage Narada. "Oh, great sage, oh Brahmana, we hope you met with no disturbances while coming here. It is due to our great fortune that we are now able to see you. By the traveling of the sun, people are relieved from the fear of the darkness of night, a fear brought about by thieves and rogues. Similarly, your traveling is like the sun's, for you drive away all kinds of fears. O Master, may we inform you that because of our being overly attached to family affairs, we almost forgot the instructions we received from Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu. Text 7. Dear Master, kindly enlighten us in transcendental knowledge, which may act as a torchlight by which we may cross the dark nations of material existence. 8. The great sage Maitreya continued, My dear Vidura, being thus petitioned by the Prachetas, the supreme devotee, Narada, who is always absorbed in thoughts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, began to reply. The great sage Narada said, when a living entity is born to engage in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the Supreme Controller, his birth, all his fruitive activities, his lifespan, his mind, his words are all factually perfect. 10. A civilized human being has 3 kinds of births. The first birth is by a pure father and mother, and this birth is called birth by semen. The next birth takes place when one is initiated by the spiritual master, and this birth is called Savitra. The third birth, called Yajna, takes place when one is given the opportunity to worship Lord Vishnu. Despite the opportunities for attaining such births, even if one gets the lifespan of a demigod, if one does not actually engage in the service of the Lord, everything is useless. Similarly, one's activities may be mundane or spiritual, but they are useless if they are not meant for satisfying the Lord. Text 11. Without devotional service, what is the meaning of severe austerities, the process of hearing, the power of speech, and the power of mental speculation, elevated intelligence, strength, and the power of the senses? 12. Transcendental practices that do not ultimately help one realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead are useless, be they mystic yoga practices, the analytical study of matter, severe austerity, the acceptance of sannyas, or the study of Vedic literature. All these may be very important aspects of spiritual advancement, but unless one understands the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, all these processes are useless. Text 13. Factually, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the original source of all self-realization. Consequently, the goal of all auspicious activities, karma, jnana, yoga, and bhakti, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 14. As pouring water on the root of a tree energizes the trunk, branches, twigs, and everything else, and as supplying food to the stomach enlivens the senses and limbs of the body, similarly, worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead through devotional service automatically satisfies the demigods, who are parts of that Supreme Personality. 15. During the rainy season, water is generated from the sun, and in due course of time, during the summer season, the very same water is again absorbed by the sun. Similarly, all living entities, moving and inert, are generated from the earth, and again, after some time, they all return to the earth as dust. Similarly, everything emanates from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in due course of time, everything enters into him again. 16. Just as the sunshine is non-different from the sun, the cosmic manifestation is also non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality is therefore all-pervasive within this material creation. When the senses are active, they appear to be part and parcel of the body. When the body is asleep, their activities are unmanifested. Similarly, the whole cosmic creation appears different and yet non-different from the Supreme Person. Text 17. My dear kings, sometimes in the sky there are clouds, sometimes there is darkness, and sometimes there is illumination. The appearance of all these takes place consecutively. Similarly, in the Supreme Absolute, the abodes of passion, darkness, and goodness appear as consecutive energies. Sometimes they appear and sometimes they disappear. Text 18. Because the Supreme Lord is the cause of all causes, he is the supersoul of all individual living entities, and he exists as both the remote and immediate cause. Since he is aloof from the material emanations, he is free from their interactions and is the Lord of material nature. You should therefore engage in his devotional service, thinking yourself qualitatively one with him. Text 19. By showing mercy to all living entities, being satisfied somehow or other, and restricting the senses from sense enjoyment, one can very quickly satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Janardhan. Text 20. Being completely cleansed of all material desires, the devotees are freed from all mental contamination. Thus, they can always think of the Lord constantly and address him very feelingly. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, knowing himself to be controlled by his devotees, does not leave them for a second, just as the sky overhead never becomes invisible. The Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes very dear to those devotees who have no material possessions, but are fully happy in possessing the devotional service of the Lord. Indeed, the Lord relishes the devotional service of such devotees. Those who are puffed up with material education, wealth, aristocracy, and fruitive activities are very proud of possessing material things, and they often deride the devotees. Even if such people offer the Lord worship, the Lord never accepts them. Text 22. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead is self-sufficient, he becomes dependent on his devotees. He does not care for the goddess of fortune, nor for the kings and demigods who are after the favors of the goddess of fortune. Where is that person who is actually grateful and will not worship the personality of Godhead? Text 23. The great sage Maitreya continued, "My dear King Vidura, Sri Narada Muni, the son of Lord Brahma, thus described all these relationships with the Supreme Personality of Godhead to the Prachetas. Afterwards, he returned to Brahmaloka. Hearing from Narada's mouth the glories of the Lord, which vanquish all the ill fortune of the world, the Prachetas also became attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Meditating on his lotus feet, they advanced to the ultimate destination. My dear Vidura, I have told you everything you wanted to know about the conversation between Narada and the Prachetas, and the conversation describing the glories of the Lord. I have related this as far as possible." 26. Sukadev Goswami continued, "O best of kings, King Parikshit, I have now finished telling about the descendants of the first son of Swayambhuva Manu, Uttamapada. I shall now try to relate the activities of the descendants of Priyavrata, the second son of Swayambhuva Manu. Please hear them attentively." 27. Although Maharaj Priyavrata received instructions from the great sage Narada, he still engaged in ruling the earth. After fully enjoying material possessions, he divided his property amongst his sons. He then attained a position by which he could return home, back to Godhead. Text 28. My dear king, in this way, after hearing the transcendental messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees from the great sage Maitreya, Vidura was overwhelmed with ecstasy. With tears in his eyes, he immediately fell down at the lotus feet of his guru, his spiritual master. He then fixed the Supreme Personality of Godhead within the core of his heart. 29. Sri Vidura said, "O great mystic, O greatest of all devotees, by your causeless mercy, I have been shown the path of liberation from this world of darkness. By following this path, a person liberated from the material world can return home back to Godhead." 30. Sukadev Goswami continued, Vidura thus offered obeisances unto the great sage Maitreya, and taking his permission, started for the city of Hastinapura to see his own kinsman, although he had no material desires. O king, those who hear this topic about kings who are completely surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead obtain without difficulty a long life, wealth, good reputation, good fortune, and ultimately the opportunity to return home back to Godhead. Thus end chapter 29, talks between Narada and King Prachinabarhi.
Okay, so Samskriti, are you going to do it?
Yes, Mataji.
All right, okay, go. You will be doing Canto 5, Chapter 1, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Text 1. King Parikshit inquired from Sukadev Goswami, "O great sage, why did King Priyavrata, who was a great self-realized devotee of the Lord, remain in household life, which is the root cause of the bondage of karma, fruitive activities, and which defeats the mission of human life?" Text 2. Devotees are certainly liberated persons. Therefore, O greatest of the Brahmanas, they cannot possibly be absorbed in family affairs. Text 3. Elevated Mahatmas who have taken shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are fully satiated by the shade of those lotus feet. Their consciousness cannot possibly become attached to family members. The king continued, O great Brahmana, this is my great doubt. How was it possible for a person like King Priyavrata, who was so attached to his wife, children, and home, to achieve the topmost infallible perfection in Krishna consciousness? Text 5. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, what you have said is correct. The glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is praised in equivalent transcendental verses by such exalted personalities as Brahma, are always pleasing to great devotees and liberated souls. One who is attached to the nectarian honey of the Lord's lotus feet and whose mind is always absorbed in his glories may sometimes be checked by some impediment, but he will still never give up the exalted position he has acquired. Text 6. Sri Sukadev Goswami continued, my dear king, Prince Priyavrata was a great devotee because he sought the lotus feet of Narada, his spiritual master, and thus achieved the highest perfection in transcendental knowledge. With advanced knowledge, he is always engaged in discussing spiritual subjects and did not divert his attention to anything else. The prince's father then asked him to charge of ruling the world. He tried to convince Priyavrata that this was his duty as indicated in the revealed scriptures. Prince Priyavrata, however, was continuously practicing bhakti yoga by constantly remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead, thus engaging all his senses in the service of the Lord. Therefore, although the order of his father cannot be rejected, the prince did not welcome it. Thus, he very conscientiously raised the question of whether he might be diverted from devotional service by accepting the responsibility of ruling over the world. 7. Sri Sukadev Goswami continued, the first created being and most powerful demigod in the universe is Lord Brahma, who is always responsible for developing universal affairs. Born directly from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he indicates his activities to the welfare of the entire universe, for he knows the purpose of the universal creation. This supremely powerful Lord Brahma, accompanied by his associates and the personified Vedas, left his own abode in the highest planetary system and descended to the place of Prince Priyavrata's meditation. As Lord Brahma descended on his carrier, the great swan, all the residents of the planets named Siddhaloka, Gandharvaloka, Satyaloka, and Charanaloka, as well as the great sages and demigods flying in their different airplanes, assembled within the canopy of the sky to receive Lord Brahma and worship him. As he received respect and adoration from the residents of the various planets, Lord Brahma appeared just like the full moon, surrounded by illuminating stars. Lord Brahma's great swan then arrived at the border of Gandhamandana hill and approached Prince Priyavrata, who was sitting there. 9. Lord Brahma, the father of Narada Muni, is a supreme person within this universe. As soon as Narada saw the great swan, he could understand that Lord Brahma had arrived. Therefore, he immediately stood up along with Swayambhuva Manu and his son Priyavrata, whom Narada was instructing. They folded their hands and began to worship Lord Brahma with great respect. 10. My dear King Parikshit, because Lord Brahma had finally descended from Satyaloka to Bhuloka, Narada Muni, Prince Priyavarta, and Swayambhuva Manu came forward to offer him objects of worship and to praise him in highly qualified language, according to Vedic etiquette. At that time, Lord Brahma, the original person of the universe, felt compassion for Priyavarta and, looking upon him with a smiling face, spoke to him as follows. 11. Lord Brahma, the supreme person within this universe, said, My dear Priyavarta, kindly hear attentively what I shall say to you. Do not be jealous of the Supreme Lord, who is beyond our experimental measurements. All of us, including Lord Shiva, your father, and the great sage Maharshi Narada, must carry out the order of the Supreme. We cannot deviate from his order. 12. One cannot avoid the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, not by the strength of severe austerities, an exalted Vedic education, or the power of a mystic yoga. Physical prowess, or intellectual activities, nor can one use his power of religion, his material opulence, or another means, either by himself or with the help of others, to defy the orders of the Supreme Lord. That is not possible for any living being, Lord Brahma down to the ant. 13. My dear Priyavarta, by the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all living entities accept different types of bodies from birth and death, activity, lamentation, illusion, fear of future dangers, and happiness and distress. Text 14. My dear boy, all of us are bound by the Vedic injunctions to the divisions of Varnashrama, according to our qualities and work. These divisions are difficult to avoid because they are scientifically arranged. We must therefore carry out our duties, our Varnashrama dharma, like bulls obliged to move accordingly to the direction of the driver pulling on ropes knotted to their noses. 15. My dear Priyavarta, according to our association with different moods of material nature, the Supreme Personality of Godhead gives us our specific bodies and the happiness and distress we achieve. One must therefore remain situated as he is and be conducted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, exactly as a blind man is led by a person who has eyes with which to see. Text 16. Even if one is liberated, he nevertheless accepts the body he has received according to his past karma. Without misconceptions, however, he regarding his enjoyment and suffering due to that karma, that the way an awakened person regards a dream he had while asleep. He thus remains steadfast and never works to achieve another material body under the influence of the three modes of material nature. 17. Even if he goes from forest to forest, one who is not self-controlled must always fear material bondage, because he is living with 6 co-wives, the mind and knowledge acquiring senses. Even householder life, however, cannot harm a self-satisfied, learned man who has conquered his senses. 18. One who is situated in household life and who systematically conquers his mind and 5 sense organs is like a king in his fortress who conquers his powerful enemies. After one has been trained in household life and his lusty desires have been decreased, he can move anywhere without danger. 19. Lord Brahma continued, My dear Priyavarta, seek shelter inside the opening of the lotus feet of the Lord, lotus of the feet of the Lord, whose navel is also like a lotus. Thus conquer the 6 sense organs, the mind and knowledge acquiring senses. Accept material enjoyment because the Lord extraordinarily has ordered you to do this. You will thus always be liberated from material association and be able to carry out the Lord's orders in your constitutional position. 20. Sri Sukadev Goswami continued, after thus being fully instructed by Lord Brahma, who is the spiritual master of the three worlds, Priyavarta, his own position being inferior, offered obeisances, accepted the order, and carried out with great respect. 21. Lord Brahma was then worshipped by Manu, who was respectfully satisfied him as well as he could. Priyavarta and Narada also looked upon Brahma with no tinges of resentment. Having engaged Priyavarta in accepting his father's request, Lord Brahma returned to his abode Satyaloka, which is indescribable by the endeavor of mundane mind or words. 22. Swayambhuva Manu, with the insistence of Lord Brahma, thus fulfilled his desires. With the permission of the great sage Narada, he delivered to his son the governmental responsibility for maintaining and protecting all the planets of the universe. He thus achieved relief from the most dangerous poisonous ocean of material desires. 23. Following the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Maharaj Priyavarta fully engaged in worldly affairs, yet he always thought of the lotus feet of the Lord, which are the cause of liberation from all material attachment. Although Priyavarta Maharaj was completely freed from all material contamination, he ruled the material world just to honor the orders of his superiors. 24. Therefore, Maharaj Priyavarta married Brahismati, the daughter of the Prajapati named Vishwakarma. In her, he begot 10 sons equal to him in beauty, character, magnanimity, and other qualities. He also begot a daughter, the youngest of all, named Urjaswati. 25. The 10 sons of Maharaj Priyavarta were named Angidra,
Agnidhara,
Idmajiva,
Yajnabahu,
Jagnabahu, Mahavira, Hiranyareta, Grhaspata, Savana, Medatiti, Vitihotra, and Kavi. There were also names of Agni, the fire god. 26. There are 3 among these 10, namely Kavi, Mahavira, and Savana, lived in complete celibacy. Thus, trained in brahmachari life from the beginning of childhood, they were very conversant with the highest perfection, known as the Paramahamsa Ashrama. 27. Thus situated in the renounced order from the beginning of their lives, all 3 of them completely controlled the activities of their senses and thus became great saints. They concentrated their minds always upon the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is in the resting place of the totality of the living entities, and who is therefore celebrated as Vasudeva. Lord Vasudeva is the only shelter of those who are actually afraid of material existence. By constantly thinking of his lotus feet, these 3 sons of Maharaj Priyavarta became advanced in pure devotional service. By the prowess of their devotional service, they could directly perceive the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated in everyone's heart as the Supersoul, and realize that there was qualitatively qualitatively no difference between themselves and him. 28. And his other wife, Maharaj Priyavarta, begot 3 sons named Uttama, Tamasa, and Raivata. All of them later took charge of Manvantara millenniums. After Kavi, Mahavira, and Savana were completely trained in the Paramahamsa stage of life, Maharaj Priyavarta ruled the universe for 11 Arbudas of years. Whenever he was determined to fix his arrow upon his bowstring with his 2 powerful arms, all opponents of the regulative principles of religious life would flee from his presence in fear of the unparalleled prowess he displayed in ruling the universe. He greatly loved his wife, Barhismati, and with the increase of days, their exchange of nuptial love also increased. By her feminine behavior, as she dressed herself, walked, got up, smiled, laughed, and glanced about, Queen Barhismati increased his energy. Thus, although he was a great soul, he appeared lost in the feminine conduct of his wife. He behaved with her just like an ordinary man, but actually he was a great soul. 30. While so excellently ruling the universe, King Priyavarta also became dissatisfied with the circumambulation of the most powerful sun god. Encircling Sumeru hill on his chariot, the sun god illuminates all the surrounding planetary systems. However, when the sun is on the north side of the hill, the south receives less light, and when the sun is in the south, the north receives less. King Priyavarta disliked this situation and therefore decided to make daylight in part of the universe where there was night. He followed the orbit of the sun god on a brilliant chariot and thus fulfilled his desire. He could perform such wonderful activities because of the power he had achieved by worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 31. When Priyavarta drove his chariot behind the sun, the rims of the chariot wheels created impressions that later became 7 oceans, dividing the planetary systems, known as Bhumandala, into 7 islands. 32. The names of the islands are Jambu, Plaksha, Salmali, Kusha,
Krauncha,
Shaka, and Pushkara. Each island is twice as large as the one preceding it, and is surrounded by a liquid substance beyond what is the next island. 33. The 7 oceans respectively contain salt water, sugarcane juice, liquor, clarified butter, milk, emulsified yogurt, and sweet drinking water. All the islands are completely surrounded by these oceans, and each ocean is equal to the breadth to the islands it surrounds. Maharaj Priyavarta, the husband of Queen Barhismati, gave
sovereignty
over these islands to his respective sons, namely
Agnidhara,
Idmajriha,
Yagnabahu,
Yagnabahu,
Hiranyareta,
Gritaprishta,
Medhatiti,
and Vitihotra. Thus they all became kings by the order of their father. King Priyavarta then gave his daughter Urjasvati in marriage of Sukracharya, who begot in her a daughter named Devayani. My dear king, a devotee who has taken shelter from the dust of the lotus feet of the Lord can transcend the influence of the 6 material waves, namely hunger, thirst, lamentation, illusion, old age, and death, and he can conquer the mind and 5 senses. However, this is not very wonderful for a pure devotee of the Lord, because even a person beyond the jurisdiction of the 4 case, in other words, an untouchable, is immediately relieved of bondage to material existence if he utters the holy name of the Lord even once.
Samskriti, there's a lot of noise coming from your side. So is it okay? Only 6 more verses to go. Can I read that?
Sure, Mataji.
All right. So text number 36. While enjoying his material opulences with full strength and influence, Maharaj Priyavrata once began to consider that although he had fully surrendered to the great Saint Narada and was actually on the path of Krishna consciousness, he had somehow become again entangled in material activities. Thus, his mind now became restless and he began to speak in the spirit of renunciation. The king thus began criticizing himself. Alas, how condemned I have become because of my sense gratification. I have now fallen into material enjoyment, which is exactly like a covered well. I have had enough. I'm not going to enjoy anymore. Just see how I have become like a dancing monkey in the hands of my wife. Because of this, I am condemned. 38. By the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Maharaja Priyavrata reawakened to his senses. He divided all his earthly possessions among his obedient sons. He gave up everything, including his wife, with whom he had enjoyed so much sense gratification, and his great and opulent kingdom, and he completely renounced all attachment. His heart, having been cleansed, became a place of pastimes for Supreme Personality of Godhead. Thus, he was able to return to the path of Krishna consciousness, spiritual life, and resume the position he had attained by the grace of the great Saint Narada. 39. There are many famous verses regarding Maharaj Priyavrata's activities. To stop the quarreling among different peoples, Maharaja Priyavrata marked boundaries at rivers and at the edges of mountains and forests so that no one would trespass upon another's property. Text 41. As a great follower and devotee of sage Narada, Maharaj Priyavrata considered hellish the opulences he had achieved by dint of the fruitive activities and mystic power, whether in the lower or heavenly planetary systems or in the human society. So we are almost at the end of the today's session. There's only 6 more verses to go. So I see Shikshashtaka is back. Mother Dandakesh, would you like to read? Or Mother Shikshashtaka?
I can read, Mataji.
Yes, okay. Go ahead.
Chapter 2, the activities of Maharaja Angidhara. In this chapter, the character of Maharaj Angidhara is described when Maharaj
Agnidhara.
Agnidhara. Thank you, Mataji. When Maharaj Priyavrata went off for spiritual realization, his son Angidhara became the ruler of Jambudvipa. In accordance with Maharaj Priyavrata's instructions, and maintained its residence with the same affection as father feels for his sons. Once Maharaja Angidhara desired to have a son, and therefore he entered a cave, Mandara mountain, to practice austerity. Understanding his desire, Lord Brahma sent a celestial girl named Purvachitti to Agnidhara's hermitage. After dressing herself very attractively, she presented herself before him with various feminine movements. And Agnidhara was naturally attracted to her. The girl's action, expression, smile, sweet words, and moving eyes were fascinating to him. Agnidhara was expert in flattery. Thus, he attracted the celestial girl.
We are only reading the verses, na? Good. You're reading the chapter summary, right?
I have something in the...
Go down a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. Text 1. Sri Sukadev Goswami continued. After his father, Maharaj Priyavarta departed to follow the path of spiritual life by undergoing austerities. King Agnidhara completely obeyed his order. Strictly observing the principles of religion, he gave full protection to the inhabitants of Jambudvipa as if they were his own begotten sons. Text 2. Desiring to get a perfect son and become an inhabitant of Pitraloka, Maharaja Agnidhara once worshipped Lord Brahma, the master of those in charge of material creation. He went to a valley of Mandara hill, where the damsels of the heavenly planets come down to stroll. There he collected garden flowers and other necessary paraphernalia and then engaged in severe austerities and worship. Text 3. Understanding King Agnidhara desire, the first and most powerful created being of this universe, Lord Brahma selected the best of the dancing girls in his assembly, whose name was Purvachitti, and sent her to the king. Text 4. The Apsara sent by Lord Brahma began strolling in a beautiful park near the place where the king was meditating and worshipping. The park was beautiful because of its dense green foliage and golden creepers. There were pairs of varied birds such as peacocks, and in a lake there were ducks and swans, all vibrating very sweet sounds. And thus the park was magnificently beautiful because of the foliage and the clear water, the lotus flowers, and the sweet singing of various kinds of birds. Mataji, until which text? What text, Mataji?
Up until 6.
6. Text 5. As Purvachitti passed by on the road in very beautiful style and mood on her own, the pleasing ornaments on her ankles tinkled with her every step. Although Prince Agnidhara was controlling his senses, practicing yoga with half-open eyes, he could see her with his lotus-like eyes, and when he heard the sweet tinkling of her bangles, he opened his eyes slightly more and could see that she was just nearby. Text 6. Like a honey bee, the Apsara smelled the beautiful and attractive flowers. She could attract the minds and visions of both humans and demigods by her playful movements. Her shyness and humility, her glance, her very pleasing sounds that poured from her mouth as she spoke, and the motion of her limbs, by all these qualities she opened for Cupid, who bears an arrow of flowers, a path of reception into the minds of men. When she spoke, nectar seemed to flow from her mouth. As she breathed, the bees, mad for the taste of her breath, tried to hover about her beautiful lotus-like eyes. Distributed by the bees, she tried to move hastily, but as she raised her feet to walk quickly, her hair, the belt on the hips, and her breasts, which were like water jugs, also moved in a way that made her extremely beautiful and attractive. Indeed, she seems to be making a path for the entrance of Cupid, who is most powerful. Therefore, the prince, completely subdued by seeing her, spoke to her as follows. Hare Krishna.
All right. Thank you so much for all the devotees who read. And it's already 8:16. So thank you so much. Vanchakalpatarubhishya kripa sindhubhyayavcha patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.